Here's something that doesn't make sense. People set goals all the time. They write them down, they think about them, they tell their friends about them, and then nothing happens. The goal sits there like a piece of furniture in a room nobody uses. What's going on? The answer isn't what most people think. It's not about willpower. It's not about wanting it badly enough. The real problem is that goals and actions live in different worlds, and most people never build the bridge between them. Think about what a goal actually is. It's a description of a future state. I want to learn physics. I want to write a book. I want to be in better shape. These are descriptions, nothing more. And here's the peculiar thing. The brain doesn't know what to do with descriptions. The brain works with actions, with sequences, with patterns of behavior that can be executed right now. When someone says, "I want to learn physics," they're holding a photograph of a destination. But there's no map, there's no sequence of steps. There's just this image of being somewhere other than where they are. And then they wonder why they're not making progress. This confusion runs deeper than most people realize. Goals feel productive. Writing them down feels like you're doing something. Thinking about them creates a little burst of satisfaction, almost as if the future you've imagined is already starting to become real. But that feeling is a trick. The brain can't tell the difference between imagining something vividly and actually doing it, not completely. So you get a small reward from just... Here's something that doesn't make sense. People set goals all the time. They write them down, they think about them, they tell their friends about them, and then nothing happens. The goal sits there like a piece of furniture in a room nobody uses. What's going on? The answer isn't what most people think. It's not about willpower. It's not about wanting it badly enough. The real problem is that goals and actions live in different worlds, and most people never build the bridge between them. Think about what a goal actually is. It's a description of a future state. I want to learn physics. I want to write a book. I want to be in better shape. These are descriptions, nothing more. And here's the peculiar thing. The brain doesn't know what to do with descriptions. The brain works with actions, with sequences, with patterns of behavior that can be executed right now. When someone says, "I want to learn physics," they're holding a photograph of a destination. But there's no map, there's no sequence of steps. There's just this image of being somewhere other than where they are. And then they wonder why they're not making progress. This confusion runs deeper than most people realize. Goals feel productive. Writing them down feels like you're doing something. Thinking about them creates a little burst of satisfaction, almost as if the future you've imagined is already starting to become real. But that feeling is a trick. The brain can't tell the difference between imagining something vividly and actually doing it, not completely. So you get a small reward from just thinking about the goal, which actually reduces the motivation to pursue it. What you need instead is something entirely different. Not goals, but systems. And the difference between these two things is fundamental. A system is a repeating pattern of behavior that exists in time. It's not a destination, it's a process that happens on a schedule. Every Monday and Thursday at 7 in the morning, you sit down with your physics textbook for 1 hour. That's a system. It has a time, a place, a specific action, and a trigger that sets it in motion. The system doesn't care about the distant future. It only cares about what happens next Monday at 7. Here's why this matters. The brain is extraordinarily good at learning patterns and executing them automatically. Give it a consistent sequence, same time, same place, same action, and after a few repetitions, the system starts running itself. You don't have to decide whether to study physics on Monday morning. The decision was made when you designed the system. Monday morning arrives, and the behavior unfolds. This is how we actually do things in the world. Not through constant acts of will, but through the construction of reliable machinery that operates whether we feel like it or not. Now, building these systems requires understanding something specific about how behavior works. Every action has 3 components: a cue, a routine, and a consequence. The cue triggers the behavior, the routine is the behavior itself, and the consequence determines whether the behavior will be repeated. Most people ignore the cue entirely. They think if they just remember to do something, they'll do it. But memory is unreliable, especially when you're busy or tired. What you need is an external trigger, something in the environment that automatically prompts the action. The most powerful cues are time and place. This is why scheduling matters. Not because time is magical, but because a clock is a reliable external signal. 7 o'clock Monday morning happens, whether you think about it or not. The clock hand arrives at the right position, and that physical fact in the world can trigger your behavior. Place works the same way. If you always study at the same desk, in the same chair, that location becomes associated with the activity. You sit down, and the brain says, "Oh, this is where we do physics problems." The behavior becomes attached to the space. This is why people who exercise at the same gym, at the same time, have much better success than people who say, "I'll exercise when I have time." When you have time is not a cue, it's a wish. 7 o'clock at the gym on Tuesday, that's a cue. The routine itself needs to be specific and small. This is where most systems fail. People design routines that are too ambitious. I'm going to study physics for 3 hours every day. That sounds impressive, but it's probably unsustainable. What happens when you're tired? When something unexpected comes up? The system breaks. And once it breaks, it's hard to restart. Better to design a routine that's almost too easy. 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Something you could do even on your worst day. The consistency matters more than the duration. Do 15 minutes every single day, and in a month you've accumulated 7.5 hours. Miss 3 days, and you've started the process of abandoning the system entirely. There's a principle here that's worth understanding. Small actions, repeated consistently, compound over time in ways that large sporadic efforts do not. If you write 1 page every day, you have a manuscript in a year. If you wait for inspiration and then write 20 pages, you'll probably wait forever. The brain learns from repetition. Every time you execute the behavior, you're strengthening the neural pathways that make that behavior easier to execute next time. This is physical. Neurons that fire together wire together. The more you repeat the pattern, the more automatic it becomes, until eventually the behavior requires almost no conscious effort at all. But here's something subtle. The consequence of the behavior needs to be immediately reinforcing, at least a little bit. This is tricky because most meaningful goals have their payoff far in the future. Learning physics takes years. Writing a book takes months. The benefits aren't immediate, so you need to engineer immediate consequences. The simplest way is to track the behavior itself. Keep a calendar. Mark an X on every day you execute the system. After a few weeks, you'll have a chain of X's, and there's something satisfying about not breaking that chain. The chain becomes its own reward. Some people use a physical object, move a marble from one jar to another every time you complete the routine. Some people use a simple notebook where they write 1 sentence about what they did. The specific method doesn't matter. What matters is that there's a small, immediate reinforcement that says, "You did the thing." This creates a feedback loop. The cue triggers the routine produces the consequence, and the consequence makes you more likely to respond to the cue next time. After enough repetitions, the entire sequence becomes automatic. You no longer need willpower. The system runs itself. Now, there's a deeper principle underneath all of this. Goals are about outcomes, but outcomes are not directly controllable. You can't decide to have learned physics. You can't decide to have written a book. These things are emergent properties of thousands of small actions accumulated over time. What you can control is your behavior in this moment. Right now, you can decide to open a textbook. You can decide to write a paragraph. You can decide to do 20 push-ups. The immediate action is always within your power. Systems shift your attention from outcomes to processes. Instead of asking, "Have I achieved the goal?" you ask, "Did I execute the system today?" And that second question has a clear, immediate answer. Either you did it or you didn't. There's no ambiguity, no waiting around for future results. This changes the psychology completely. With goals, you're always measuring yourself against something you haven't accomplished yet. You're always falling short until the moment you succeed, and that moment might be months or years away. With systems, you succeed every single day you execute the behavior. The success is immediate and tangible. This isn't just philosophical. It affects motivation in a concrete way. The brain releases dopamine not when you achieve distant goals, but when you make progress toward them. Every time you execute your system, you're creating a small win, and small wins produce the neurochemical reward that keeps you going. There's another aspect to this that's worth thinking about. Systems free up mental resources that goals consume. When you have a goal, part of your mind is constantly monitoring your progress, worrying about whether you're doing enough, feeling anxious about the gap between where you are and where you want to be. This monitoring takes energy. With a system, there's nothing to monitor except whether you did today's routine. Either you studied physics for 20 minutes this morning, or you didn't. That's it. No need to calculate how many more years of study you need. No need to compare yourself to others. No need to worry about the ultimate outcome. Just execute the system and move on with your day. This mental simplification is powerful. It reduces decision fatigue. It eliminates the constant internal debate about whether to do the thing. Monday at 7, you study physics. There's no decision to make. But let's be clear about something. Systems aren't magic. Building a system takes thought and planning. You need to understand your own patterns. When do you have consistent time available? Where can you work without interruption? What cues already exist in your environment that you can leverage? Some people are naturally structured. They wake up at the same time every day, eat at the same time, follow predictable routines. For these people, adding a new system is relatively straightforward. Find a slot in the existing pattern and insert the new behavior. Other people have lives that are more chaotic. Different schedule every day, unexpected demands, lots of interruptions. For these people, building systems is harder, but even more important. You need to find the stable points, the times or places that are reliably available, and build your systems around those anchor points. Maybe you can't control when you wake up, but you always eat lunch. Okay, the 15 minutes after lunch is when you read. Maybe your evenings are unpredictable, but you always commute home from work. Use that time. The specific implementation doesn't matter. What matters is finding the reliable patterns in your life and attaching new behaviors to them. There's also the question of multiple systems. Can you maintain several at once? The answer is yes, but with a caveat. Each system requires a certain amount of mental overhead until it becomes automatic. If you try to install 5 new behaviors simultaneously, you'll probably fail at all of them. Better to build systems sequentially. Start with 1. Execute it consistently for several weeks until it becomes automatic. Then add another. The first system is now running on autopilot, so you have mental resources available to establish the second one. Build your life this way, one system at a time, and after a year or two, you'll have a collection of automated behaviors that produce enormous cumulative results. Here's where this gets interesting. Once you have several systems running, they start to interact. The system where you exercise every morning gives you more energy, which makes the system where you study in the evening easier to maintain. The system where you read for 20 minutes before bed improves your thinking, which makes your work system more effective. This is compound interest, but for behavior. Each system produces benefits that amplify the effects of your other systems. The whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts. And there's something else. Systems create identity. When you execute a behavior consistently, you start to see yourself as the kind of person who does that thing. You're not someone who wants to learn physics. You're someone who studies physics every Monday and Thursday morning. That's who you are. This identity shift is subtle but profound. Identity shapes behavior more powerfully than goals ever could. Now, what about the goals themselves? Should you abandon them entirely? Not exactly. Goals are useful as direction indicators. They tell you which systems to build. If your goal is to learn physics, that suggests building a system around regular study. If your goal is to write a book, that suggests building a system around daily writing. The goal provides direction, but the system provides movement. You need both. The mistake is focusing on the goal at the expense of the system, or worse, thinking that setting the goal is itself an accomplishment. There's a final piece to this that ties everything together. Systems work because they align with how the brain actually operates. The brain is not a rational planning engine. It's a pattern-matching machine that learns from repetition and responds to cues in the environment. When you try to achieve goals through willpower and decision-making, you're fighting against the brain's natural operating system. You're trying to consciously control every action, every day, forever. That's exhausting, and it doesn't work for long. When you build systems, you're working with the brain's natural machinery. You're installing patterns that become automatic. You're using external cues to trigger behavior instead of relying on memory and will. You're creating immediate feedback loops that reinforce the behavior. You're doing what the brain is already designed to do. This is why systems work when goals fail. Not because systems are more powerful.
You could spend 12 hours in the library with a neon yellow highlighter, painting the entire book like it's a coloring book, and I guarantee you, congratulations, you just spent 12 hours doing absolutely nothing but coloring. What separates the genius from the parrot isn't how much they read, nor the magical technique they use to highlight words. The difference lies in what happens inside the black box, right there in the spongy tissue of your brain. Most of you study as if you were stacking bricks in a vacant lot. You pick up a fact, throw it there. Pick up a formula, throw it there. And you expect that magically a house will appear. It's not going to happen. Real learning is architecture, not accumulation. Deep processing is any type of thinking that leads you to form a schema of knowledge, an interconnected network. Think of your memory like a spider web. If you throw a piece of information at it and it doesn't stick to anything, if it stays isolated, floating in a vacuum, guess what your brain does? It throws it out. The brain is absurdly efficient at forgetting what isn't connected. It says, "This is useless. Bye." That's why you read a page and by the time you get to the bottom, you've already forgotten the top. You did shallow processing. You focused on memorizing, on repeating, on knowing the name. That is isolated learning. The secret to learning faster than everyone else is to force integrated learning. You don't just want to understand the concept, you want to know where it lives, who its neighbors are, and how it compares to the concept down the street. When you try to explain something complex simply, the essence of my favorite technique, you are forcing your brain to do this deep processing. You are creating analogies, comparing and contrasting. So electricity flows like water in a pipe. Bingo! The moment you make that connection, you stopped memorizing and started understanding. You integrated the information into your web, and once it's stuck in the web, connected to other things you already know, the brain protects it like gold. People who do this naturally are the ones you call geniuses or talented, the ones who get high grades without studying as much. But the good news, thanks to neuroplasticity, is that you can train this. It's not genetics, it's habit. So, from now on, I want you to install a radar in your head, an intellectual lie detector. Ask yourself every 5 minutes, is my learning right now isolated or integrated? If you are just trying to memorize the definition, stop. You are digging a hole in water. Change your approach. Ask, how does this look like something I already know? Why is this different from that? Force the connection. Is it uncomfortable? Is it hard? Great! The discomfort is the sound of your neurons lifting weights. If it were easy, you wouldn't be learning. You'd just be strolling. But be careful. Even with deep processing, you can get lost if you don't have a control mechanism, a steering wheel to guide this mental Ferrari. And that is exactly where most people spin out on the curve. Pay attention to me now, because what I'm about to say might sound like an insult at first glance, but it is the key that unlocks the universe of knowledge. Most of you are doing it wrong. You look at a book, at a formula, at a complex concept, and you think that knowing the name of something is the same as knowing something. It's not. I can know the name of a bird in all the languages of the world, but when I'm done, I'll know absolutely nothing about the bird. I'll only know about the humans who named it. To learn for real, to learn fast, to learn in a way that sticks to your mind like gum on a shoe, requires something more. It requires brutal honesty. It requires you to stop kidding yourself. And the best way to stop kidding yourself is to try to teach what you think you know to someone who knows nothing. Or better yet, to a 5-year-old. If you can't explain it simply, you didn't understand it. Period. Now, imagine with me something that will change the way you face every book, every class, every new intellectual challenge. Imagine there is a secret, not magic, but a method, a sort of algorithm for the brain that allows you to devour information and transform it into deep understanding, not just cheap memorization. This method, my friends, starts with a fundamental shift in your head. The first step isn't opening the book, it's opening the mind. I'm talking about mindset. You see confusion as the enemy. You look at a difficult problem, feel that knot in your stomach, that feeling of, I'm too dumb for this, and you run. Wrong. Confusion is the signal. It is the pain of intellectual growth. If you aren't confused, you aren't learning. You're just reviewing what you already know. People with a fixed mindset look at a mistake and see failure. People who learn fast, who really understand the gears of the world, look at a mistake and see data. They see information. Ah, so it's not this way. Interesting. It is this curiosity in the face of error that accelerates learning by 20 times. Yes, 20 times. I'm not the one saying it. The data is. So, the first thing you need to do to master this technique, to learn faster than everyone else, is to embrace the initial stupidity. Accept that you are going to feel like an idiot at the beginning. And guess what? It's wonderful, because that is the moment the magic happens. It's when your brain starts making new connections, neuroplasticity kicks in, breaking and remaking paths. But you have to want this. You have to be willing to look foolish to become a genius. If you are afraid of making mistakes, you've already lost before you started. Learning to learn is absurdly important and absurdly complicated, but it starts with this simple permission, the permission to be wrong. Now, it's no use having the right mindset if you can't even get your butt in the chair. And here we enter the second dimension, something many of you ignore because you think it's stuff for clean freaks, but it's pure physics, self-management. Learning doesn't happen in a vacuum. If you think you're going to understand quantum mechanics in 30-second bursts, I have bad news. You won't. Deep learning requires a protected environment. It requires you to manage your focus as if it were the scarcest resource on the planet, because it is. You need to identify the chain of events that leads to your distraction. You pick up your phone to check the time, see a notification, click it, and poof! An hour is gone. You need to cut this at the root. Isolate the behavior. Remove the temptation. Create a space where deep study can actually happen. Without this, the technique I'm going to teach you is nothing more than a nice theoretical idea. You need uninterrupted time and attention to truly process the information. And process is the key word here. It's not about reading. Reading is easy. Anyone can read. It's about what your brain does with what you read. And that is where the majority fails miserably. Forget everything you think you know about studying. Seriously, throw it out. Most of you treat the brain like it's a supermarket shopping basket. You walk down the information aisles, grab a fact here, a formula there, throw it all in the basket, and think that when you get to the checkout counter, you've magically become intelligent. Let me tell you a secret. When you get to the checkout counter, the basket has a hole in it. You lost everything on the way. This is what we call shallow processing. You read the words, your eyes moved from left to right, but your brain was in standby mode. Real learning, the kind that sticks, the kind that allows you to solve problems you've never seen before, happens in a different dimension. We call this deep processing, but the fancy name gets in the way. Let's call it what it really is. The art of not letting information die of loneliness. Understand one thing about your gray matter. It hates orphaned information. If you learn an isolated fact, let's say the definition of mitochondria, and you don't connect it to anything, your brain looks at it and says, this connects to nothing I already know, therefore it's trash. And poof, it disappears in less than a minute. Deep processing is the deliberate act of stitching new information into the fabric of what you already know. It's not about memorizing, it's about integrating. Imagine that your knowledge is a giant spider web. The amateur student tries to glue a speck of dust in the air with no thread attached. The genius pulls a thread from the existing web and ties it to the new information. He asks, how is this similar to what I saw yesterday? How is this different from what I expected? If this is true, what else must be true? Do you want to know if you are really learning or just wasting time? Turn on your radar for isolated versus integrated. If you are reading and thinking, okay, got the definition, next, you are in isolated mode. You are digging your own intellectual grave. Integrated mode is loud. It's chaotic. You stop and think, wait, this works exactly like the water pressure in the pipes at my house. In that moment, when you create an analogy, when you translate the complex into the simple, you created a physical hook in your brain. You transformed a loose piece of data into a robust knowledge schema. That's why I always say, if you can't explain it to your grandmother, you didn't understand it, because explaining requires you to connect the new idea to concepts she already has.
But I'm going to be honest with you.
This hurts. Deep processing is uncomfortable. It's exhausting. Your brain is going to want to go back to the comfort of just highlighting the text and passively rereading. Resisting that comfort is what separates the curious from the mediocre. You are building mental muscles, and there is no hypertrophy without sweat. Now, you can have the right mindset, the perfect environment, and be willing to process deeply. But how do you guarantee you aren't kidding yourself along the way? How do you know if your brilliant analogy isn't actually complete nonsense? You need a real-time quality control system. You need to be the manager of your own mental factory. And this is where most people smash their faces against the wall, because the fourth dimension is missing. You are there, sweating bullets, trying to connect the dots, creating analogies, forcing your brain out of its comfort zone. Great, but who is in command? Who is checking if you aren't just running in circles with great intensity? Most of you study like a broken robot that hits a wall, backs up, and hits the same wall again, only harder, hoping the wall will move. That's not persistence, it's insanity. To learn faster than anyone else, you need to develop a dual personality. You need to be the student who is learning and at the same time the cruel scientist observing that student with a clipboard in hand. We enter the fourth dimension, self-regulation. It is the ability to monitor your own thinking in real time and, most importantly, have the courage to change course when the ship is sinking. Most people have a primitive adjustment strategy. Oh, I did poorly on the test? I'll study more hours. Wrong. More hours doing the wrong thing just creates a more consolidated mistake. Self-regulation requires a constant three-step cycle: cue, monitoring, and adjusting. You are reading a complex text. Suddenly, your eyes pass over 3 paragraphs and you absorbed nothing. That is the cue. The mediocre student ignores the cue and keeps reading, praying for a miracle. The elite student monitors. Whoops, my brain turned off. Passive mode took over. And then he makes the adjustment. He doesn't keep reading. He stops. He changes the technique. Reading isn't working. I'm going to draw a diagram. I'm going to try to explain it out loud to the wall. I'm going to ask the book a question. He changes tactics until deep processing starts happening again. But here is the deadly trap where most of you will fall. And I need you to pay double attention now. There is a treacherous phenomenon called the misinterpreted effort hypothesis. When you start self-regulating, when you realize your passive reading is garbage and decide to switch to an active technique, like trying to explain the concept without looking, my favorite, do you know what will happen? It's going to seem harder. It's going to seem like you're learning less because you're struggling more. And your brain, lazy as it is, will scream, "Hey, this is too hard. It must be wrong. Let's go back to highlighting text. That felt nicer." If you listen to that voice, you've lost. The difficulty isn't a sign that you are failing. It is physical proof that you are learning. If you change your technique and feel like your brain is frying, congratulations, you just found the way. Don't retreat to comfort. Self-regulation is the discipline of feeling the discomfort of inefficiency, adjusting to a harder technique, and enduring the pain of growth. You need to be ruthless with your own method. Don't fall in love with the way you study. Fall in love with understanding. If a tool doesn't work, throw it out and grab another. Test, fail, adjust, repeat. If you do this, you stop being a passive passenger in your education and become the pilot. But Even if you have the mindset, the focus, the deep processing, and the self-regulation, there is a final villain, a silent thief that steals everything you've achieved while you sleep. You can understand everything today, be an absolute genius at 10 p.m., and wake up tomorrow a complete ignoramus. And it's not your fault, it's biology. But there is a way to hack this too. The villain I mentioned? His name is decay. It is the law of entropy applied to your memory. You built that beautiful house of cards of knowledge last night, and this morning, the wind blew and half of it fell. This is biological. It is inevitable. As soon as you learn something, that information begins to fade. Your brain is a machine of efficiency. It doesn't want to waste energy maintaining neural connections for information you don't use, so it cleans house. And if you do nothing, you are going to spend your whole life filling a leaky bucket, learning and forgetting, in an eternal cycle of mediocrity. How do we stop this bleeding? We enter the fifth and final dimension, the one that guarantees knowledge stays, retrieval. And please, for the love of physics, do not confuse this with reviewing. Reviewing, for most of you, is scanning your colorful notes and saying, "Oh yeah, I remember this." Lie. You don't remember. You just recognize. Recognizing is passive and easy. Retrieving is active and painful. Retrieving is closing the book, looking at the ceiling, ignoring your notes, and forcing your brain to reconstruct the concept from scratch. It is dragging the information out of long-term memory. It is the difference between looking at the answer to a math equation and thinking you understood it, versus having a blank sheet in front of you and having to solve the equation yourself. The secret here is timing. If you try to retrieve 5 seconds after reading, it's too easy. It doesn't count. You need to let the forgetting start to act. You need to let the rust set in a little. This is what we call spaced retrieval. You learn today, try to remember tomorrow. It's going to be hard. You will stutter. But when you manage to pull that information back from the depths, you send a powerful chemical signal to your brain. Hey, stop! Don't throw this away. I need this. You reset the forgetting curve, and every time you do this, the memory decays more slowly. You are literally refilling the memory before it empties. But there is a final trap for those who think they are clever. Don't be a flashcard robot. Many of you fall into the error of practicing retrieval in an isolated way. You memorize definitions like parrots. What is the mitochondria? The powerhouse of the cell. Great. You memorize the phrase. But if I give you a complex biology problem where cellular energy is the key, you freeze. Why? Because you practiced isolated retrieval, not integrated retrieval. The golden rule is practice how you play. If in the real world or on your exam you need to solve problems, it's useless to practice reciting definitions. You need to retrieve knowledge by applying it. Mix up the subjects. Use interleaving. Attack the problem from different angles. Force your brain to not just remember what it is, but where and how to use it. Now you have the complete map. You have the 5 keys. But having the treasure map doesn't make you rich if you don't start digging. And most of you, unfortunately, love collecting maps and hate picking up the shovel. Mindset to accept the mistake. Self-management to create the space. Deep processing to weave the web. Self-regulation to pilot the process. And retrieval to beat time. But let me tell you one last inconvenient truth, perhaps the most important of all. Knowing how the engine works doesn't make the car go. You can watch this video 100 times. You can tattoo deep processing on your forehead. But if you don't close this tab right now and go there, in the silence, to fight against the confusion and the urge to give up, nothing will change. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. Do not confuse the familiarity of watching a video with real understanding. Nature cannot be fooled. Your brain cannot be cheated. Either you build the connections or you have nothing. If you made it this far, if you endured the complexity and are willing to embrace the discomfort, you are already part of an absolute minority. Prove it now. I want you to make a brutal diagnosis of yourself right here and now. Which of these 5 dimensions is your anchor? What is your speed limiter? Is it the fragile mindset? Is it the lack of focus? Is it shallow studying? Comment below with the exact phrase, "My limiter is," and complete it with the dimension you are going to destroy starting today. Make it public. Commit to it. Most people will close this video and go back to the comfort of the shallow, of the illusion of competence. They will continue studying a lot and learning little, frustrated, blaming a lack of talent, but not you. Now you know that talent is a lie. What exists is the method. You have the choice to step out of the cave. Learning to learn is the superpower that makes all other superpowers possible. If you master this, there is no book too hard. There is no concept too complex. The whole world opens up for you to play. And if this spark lit something inside you, if you felt that tingle of curiosity you haven't felt in a long time, smash the like button. Not for the algorithm, but as a signal to yourself that you value depth in a world addicted to superficiality. Subscribe to the channel if you want to continue exploring the universe of knowledge without training wheel. Class is dismissed. Now, the real work.
You've probably noticed something strange about learning. Two people can study the same material for the same amount of time, yet one walks away genuinely understanding it, while the other barely remembers anything at all. The difference isn't intelligence. It isn't talent. It's something far more fundamental. And once you understand it, learning becomes almost absurdly efficient. The traditional approach to learning is broken at its core. People sit with textbooks, read page after page, highlight sentences, reread chapters, and convince themselves they're making progress. They spend hours with material, yet when tested, they struggle. When asked to explain what they've learned, they stumble. The knowledge hasn't truly entered their minds. This happens because there's a profound misunderstanding about what learning actually is. People treat their brains like filing cabinets, believing that if they just push information in enough times, it'll stick. They equate exposure with understanding. They mistake recognition for knowledge. When they read something and it feels familiar, they think they've learned it. But familiarity is a deceptive feeling. Here's the real mechanism. The brain doesn't store information like a tape recorder. It builds models. It creates structures of understanding. And these structures are only built through a specific kind of mental activity that most people never engage in. Think about someone learning to play the piano. They could watch someone else play for 100 hours and memorize what it looks like. They could read books about proper technique and chord progressions, but until their own fingers touch the keys, until they struggle to make the sounds themselves, until they fail and correct and fail again, no real learning happens. The same principle applies to everything else. Yet somehow people forget this when it comes to intellectual skills. The fundamental error is passive consumption. Reading is passive. Listening is passive. Watching demonstrations is passive. These activities feel productive because information is flowing past your consciousness, but the brain isn't doing the work that builds understanding. Real learning requires a completely different approach. It demands active reconstruction. Here's the principle. You haven't learned something until you can recreate it from nothing. Not recall it, not recognize it when you see it. Recreate it. Build it again in your mind without the original in front of you. This changes everything about how you study. Instead of reading a chapter 3 times, you read it once, close the book, and try to write out everything it said from memory. Not the words, the ideas, the structure, the relationships. What you can't reconstruct is what you haven't learned. Those are the gaps. Those are where you focus. When you do this, something remarkable happens. Your brain suddenly wakes up. It shifts from passive receiver to active participant. It starts asking questions it never asked before. Why does this connect to that? What happens if this changes? How does this fit with what was said earlier? These questions don't emerge during passive reading. They only surface when you're forced to rebuild the knowledge yourself. The textbook becomes a reference, not a script. You attempt to explain the concept on paper. You get stuck. You realize you don't actually understand something you thought you did. You go back to the source, find the specific piece you're missing, understand it properly this time, close the book again, and continue reconstructing. This is vastly more efficient than traditional study. You might spend 1 hour doing this versus 3 hours reading and rereading, yet the 1 hour produces deeper, more permanent understanding. Why? Because you've done the cognitive work that actually builds knowledge structures. You've practiced the very thing you'll need to do when you use this knowledge later. Generate it from your own understanding. But there's a second principle that multiplies this effectiveness. You must work at the edge of your ability, not in the middle of it. The brain has a peculiar property. It only builds new structures when it encounters difficulty it can barely overcome. If something is too easy, the brain doesn't bother strengthening those pathways, it already has them. If something is too hard, the brain can't make progress and gives up. The sweet spot is right at the boundary where you're struggling but can push through. Most people avoid this zone. They practice what they already know because it feels good. They read material at their current level because it's comfortable. But this is like lifting the same light weight forever and wondering why you're not getting stronger. When you're learning a new mathematical technique, don't do 10 problems that are variations of the same thing. Do 1 or 2 to grasp the pattern, then immediately jump to problems that combine it with other techniques. Make yourself uncomfortable. Get stuck. Figure out why you're stuck. That's where learning happens. When you're reading a difficult technical book, don't reread the same section until it feels comfortable. Read it once carefully, then force yourself to explain it. The discomfort of not being able to explain it properly is the signal you're at the right difficulty level. The effort to push through that discomfort is what builds understanding. The human brain evolved to learn most efficiently through problem solving, not through passive absorption. For thousands of years, learning meant figuring out how to make fire, track animals, predict weather, craft tools. These were all active processes. You couldn't learn them by watching, you had to do them. Fail, adjust, and try again. Academic learning is relatively new in human history, and it often violates these natural learning mechanisms. But the brain hasn't changed. It still learns best through active struggle with problems at the edge of its current capability. Here's the third principle. Understanding must be built from the bottom up, not from the top down. People often try to learn complex things by memorizing high-level summaries or final conclusions. They want the elegant equation without understanding what the symbols mean. They want the sophisticated theorem without grasping the simple cases it builds from. This is backwards. Real understanding is always constructed from fundamentals. You need to know what the pieces are before you can see how they fit together. You need to understand the simple cases before the complex ones make sense. This seems obvious, yet people constantly violate it because they're in a hurry. When you encounter something you don't understand, trace it backwards. What simpler thing does this depend on? Do you truly understand that simpler thing, or did you just memorize it? Can you explain it without looking at notes? If not, you've found your actual starting point. Begin there. This might mean going back to basics you thought you already knew. That's fine. Better to spend an hour truly understanding a fundamental concept than weeks building a shaky structure on top of a misunderstood foundation. There's something else that happens when you build from fundamentals. You develop the ability to figure things out rather than just remember them. If you understand the basic principles deeply, you can derive more complex results when you need them. You're not dependent on memory. You're working from understanding. This leads to the fourth principle. Explanation is the ultimate test. The physicist Enrico Fermi had a habit that revealed his deep understanding. When he learned something new, he would immediately try to explain it to someone else in the simplest possible terms. If he couldn't make it simple, he knew he didn't really understand it yet. This is a perfect diagnostic tool. Can you explain the concept to someone who doesn't already know it? Can you use an analogy that captures the essential idea? Can you answer questions about it without having to consult your notes? The act of explaining forces you to clarify your own thinking. You can't hide behind technical jargon when you're explaining to a novice. You have to understand what's really happening, not just what the textbook says is happening. Try this with everything you learn. After studying a topic, pretend you're teaching it to someone. Speak out loud if you need to. Write it out as if for a letter. When you get stuck or realize your explanation is unclear, that's valuable information. That's exactly where your understanding is weak. This also creates another beneficial effect. It shows you the difference between knowing something and knowing about something. You might know about quantum mechanics, that it exists, that it's strange, that particles behave oddly. But you don't know quantum mechanics unless you can work through the actual mathematics, explain the principles, predict outcomes of experiments. The distinction matters immensely. Now let's talk about the deeper mechanism behind all of this. The brain creates knowledge through a process of building and testing mental models. A mental model is a simplified representation of how something works. When you truly understand something, you have a working model in your mind that you can run like a simulation. For instance, when you understand how a lever works, you have a mental model of forces, pivot points, and distances. You can imagine moving the pivot and predict what happens to the effort needed. You don't need to memorize specific examples. You can generate new examples from your model. These models are built through active engagement. When you passively read about levers, you might form a vague impression, but you don't build the model. When you try to solve problems about levers, when you make predictions and check if they're right, when you get confused and have to reconsider your assumptions, that's when the model gets built and refined. The key insight is that mental models are built through error correction. Your brain makes a prediction based on its current understanding. Reality provides feedback. If there's a mismatch, your brain adjusts the model. This cycle only happens when you're actively using your understanding, not when you're passively receiving information. This is why practice problems are so much more valuable than worked examples. Watching someone else solve a problem doesn't engage your prediction and correction mechanisms. Solving it yourself does. Even when you get it wrong, especially when you get it wrong, you're forcing your brain to adjust its models. The same applies to memory. People think they have bad memories when really they just haven't encoded information properly. Memory isn't about strength of repetition. It's about depth of processing and number of connections. When you actively reconstruct information, when you explain it in your own words, when you connect it to other knowledge, you're creating multiple pathways to that information. Later retrieval becomes easy because there are many routes to reach it. When you simply reread the same text, you create only one shallow pathway that's easily lost. Let's make this concrete with some scenarios. Suppose you're learning calculus, the traditional approach. Read about derivatives, watch your professor work examples, copy down formulas, practice similar problems until you can do them smoothly. The result: you can do textbook problems but panic when faced with anything slightly different. The better approach: read the basic concept once. Close the book. Try to explain what a derivative means without mathematical notation, just the idea. Can't do it? Open the book, find what you missed, close it again, try to explain it better. Once you can do that, try to figure out how you'd calculate a simple derivative from first principles. Get stuck, check the book for just that piece, close it, try again. Then solve one simple problem. Now try to predict what would happen in a more complex situation before looking at how it's done. Make the prediction specific. Check if you're right. If not, figure out where your mental model was wrong. Adjust it. Try another prediction. This feels slower initially, but you're building genuine understanding. 2 weeks later, you'll still know how derivatives work. You'll be able to tackle novel problems because you understand the underlying principles, not just the procedures. Or suppose you're learning history. The traditional approach: read chapters, highlight important dates and events, make timeline notes, reread before the test. The result? You can recognize names and dates, but couldn't explain the actual flow of cause and effect. The better approach: read about a historical period. Close the book. Try to write out the narrative in your own words. What happened and why? What were the actual causes, not just the temporal sequence? Get stuck on the connections. Go back to find them. Close the book. Continue. Then ask yourself questions the book didn't ask. Why did this happen in this place and not elsewhere? What had to be true for these events to unfold this way? What would have happened if one factor were different? When you force yourself to think through these counterfactuals, you build a much richer model of the historical dynamics. Or consider learning a technical skill like programming. The traditional approach: follow tutorials step by step, typing what the instructor types, getting working results, feeling like you're learning. The result? You can't write code without a reference. You don't understand why things work. You panic when something breaks. The better approach: read what a programming concept does. Close the tutorial. Try to write code using that concept without looking. It won't work. Figure out why. Look up just that one thing you need. Try again. Get it working. Now try to use it in a different way you haven't seen. Force yourself to adapt, not just copy. The pattern is the same across all domains: active reconstruction, working at the edge of ability, building from fundamentals, testing through explanation, and developing working mental models. There's a final element that ties this together: patience with the process and trust in the struggle. Learning done right feels harder than passive study. You get stuck more often. You feel uncertain more frequently. This discomfort makes people abandon the method and return to the familiar comfort of reading and rereading. They mistake the comfortable feeling of recognition for the substance of learning. But the discomfort is the point. That feeling of struggle, that sense of reaching for something just beyond your grasp, that's the sensation of your brain building new structures. When it feels too easy, you're not learning. When it feels impossible, you've jumped too far ahead. When it feels difficult but achievable, you're exactly where you need to be. The human mind is extraordinarily capable of learning. It's been doing so for hundreds of thousands of years, solving problems far more complex than most academic subjects. It knows how to learn. You just have to work with its natural mechanisms instead of against them. The next time you need to learn something, try this different approach. Don't read it multiple times. Read it once with full attention, then close the source and actively work with the material. Reconstruct it, explain it. Test yourself not with recognition but with generation. Work at the edge of what you can do. Build from the bottom up. Create mental models through prediction and correction. It might feel strange at first. You'll be uncomfortable, but you'll learn more in 1 hour than you previously learned in 3. The knowledge will be deeper, more flexible, more permanent. You'll understand it, not just know about it. And that's the difference between appearing to study and actually learning. One is passive consumption that feels productive but builds nothing lasting. The other is active construction that feels difficult but creates genuine understanding. The choice, as always, is yours.
Imagine your mind as a giant laboratory. Every time you learn something new, you're building a mental experience, and the deeper that experience goes, the stronger it becomes. What separates a genius from an ordinary person isn't the size of the brain, it's the quality of construction. Pay close attention to me now, because what you're about to hear could forever change the way you learn. The secret to training your mind like a genius isn't about stuffing it with information. It's about building knowledge with structure, purpose, and full awareness. Think of a simple cube. Inside it lies an idea, a formula, a concept, a memory. You can put it together quickly, using tape and thin paper, but it'll break the first time it's tested. Or you can weld each side carefully, creating a firm, almost indestructible structure. That's what a genius's mind does. It doesn't rush, it refines. Most people learn in a hurry, trying to finish before they understand. They read, repeat, memorize, forget. But here's the secret. The brain isn't a vault of words, it's a living organism of thoughts, and every thought needs to connect to another. Memory isn't a gift, it's the side effect of well-crafted thinking. You remember best what you've actually thought about, what made you reason, make mistakes, compare, and doubt. And that's why, if you want to train your mind like a genius, you need to relearn how to think. Learn slowly, think deeply, build with intention. But now, listen carefully, because here's a truth that almost nobody talks about. Most of what you learn, you forget. A week after studying something new, half of it disappears from memory. And that's not because you're stupid, distracted, or lazy. It's because your brain was designed to forget whatever it doesn't see as important. But there's a secret. The mind doesn't forget what is revisited with purpose. That's the first principle of a genius mind, the spacing effect. Every time you revisit an idea, your brain strengthens it, like a muscle being trained. The first time you learn it, the knowledge is fragile. The second time, it resists. The third time, it starts becoming part of you. But here's what almost nobody understands. Repetition alone isn't enough. The difference between an average mind and a trained one lies in how it repeats. You can reread a text 10 times and stay the same. Or you can ask yourself once, what does this really mean? And never forget it again. That's why geniuses don't study longer, they study smarter. They turn every repetition into a new experiment. They don't review, they rediscover. Each time they revisit an idea, they try to see it from a new angle, a new context, a new question. And with every new review, the curve of forgetting flattens until it almost disappears. That's how knowledge becomes solid, enduring, and impossible to erase. Here's the key. You don't need to learn more. You need to review better. The secret is to spread your learning over time in small doses at different moments. The brain needs that space to reorganize its connections, like letting cement dry before adding another brick. A genius understands something most people ignore. To remember is not to repeat, it's to rebuild. And with each reconstruction, the brain creates new pathways until knowing becomes natural, automatic, almost intuitive. Now, imagine if I told you there's a second principle that makes the brain learn with less effort and retain knowledge for decades. This is where real mental training begins. Pay attention to me now, because here's what almost nobody has told you about learning. You don't learn when you listen. You learn when you create. It's what we call the generation effect. The human brain wasn't built to store information like a hard drive. It was built to create it. And every time you create something out of what you've learned, something deep inside you changes. Imagine you're putting together a puzzle. If someone hands it to you already done, you look at the picture, understand it, and forget it. But if you build it yourself, piece by piece, your brain records every attempt, every mistake, every guess. You didn't learn the image, you built it inside your mind. And that's what makes it part of who you are. That's why geniuses aren't people with better memories. They're people who participate more in their own thinking. They don't repeat words, they manufacture meaning. When they read something, they stop and ask, what does this really mean? How would I explain it to someone else? And at that very moment, the brain lights up. Thousands of new connections form. And what was once just information becomes living knowledge. If you want to train your mind like a genius, stop consuming passively. Rewrite ideas in your own words. Explain them out loud. Ask questions that make you uncomfortable. Create strange analogies. Imagine the concept in a completely different context. The more mental effort your brain makes to arrive at an answer, the stronger that knowledge becomes. Learning is like lifting weights. The more cognitive strain, the stronger your memory muscle grows. And that's where most people fail. They want to learn fast, without friction, without thought. But learning without effort is learning that slips away. Now, imagine something fascinating. If you applied this principle, creating instead of repeating, with just one small change every day, your brain would start to transform. And that's where the next secret comes in. How to test what you truly know. Not to pass a test, but to discover whether your mind is getting stronger or just more confident. Now imagine this simple scene. You study, you understand, you think you know, and then someone asks a question, and suddenly, what felt solid collapses. That's the moment your brain reveals the truth. You didn't really learn, you only recognized the content. And that's why the third principle of a genius mind is the testing effect. Geniuses never trust the feeling of I know. They test what they know. Not to get grades, but to see if the knowledge survives outside their heads. When you try to recall something without looking at your notes, the brain switches into survival mode. It searches through your connections, rebuilds the paths, and tries to access the information through different routes. It's in that process, the struggle, that memory becomes stronger. Not when you read, but when you reach. Learning is like walking in the dark. The more times you try to find the path, the more familiar it becomes. That's why recalling is more powerful than reviewing. Reviewing is looking at the map. Recalling is walking the territory. The greatest thinkers do this constantly. They don't memorize formulas. They challenge themselves with questions. What if I change this? What if I explain it differently? What if I got it all wrong? Those questions are the hammers that forge understanding. You want to know if you've truly learned something? Try to explain it, without looking. If you get stuck, perfect. That's your brain showing you where the foundation is weak. Mistakes aren't signs of stupidity. They're signs of reconstruction. Every failure is an adjustment point, a chance to reorganize your mind. When you learn this way, knowledge stops being a loose memory. It becomes a network of living ideas. And the more connections you build, the harder it becomes to ever forget. Now, imagine if you could combine all these principles, reviewing with purpose, creating to understand, and testing to solidify, into a single way of thinking. The result would be a mind that doesn't just learn, but thinks on a higher level. And that's exactly what comes next. Pay close attention, because what I'm about to tell you is the turning point between ordinary learning and extraordinary thinking. The fourth principle of a genius mind is higher order thinking, the kind of reasoning that transforms facts into wisdom. Most people learn in a straight line. They see something, grasp the basics, repeat it, move on. But great thinkers, the true geniuses, don't stop there. They ask, how does this connect to everything else? They link ideas. They see patterns. Imagine knowledge as a vast map. Every concept you learn is a single point. If you learn dozens of disconnected things, you'll just have dots scattered in the void. But when you start connecting them, something magical happens. Meaning emerges. And meaning is what creates real memory. That's why when you truly understand an idea, it doesn't stay trapped in one context. It spreads. It blends with other ideas. It builds mental bridges that no one else can see. That's how creative thought is born. A genius doesn't memorize answers. They build mental models. And when a new problem appears, they don't panic. They ask, what structure can I apply here? They don't search for a memory. They search for a relationship. Here's the secret. The more connections you build, the easier your brain thinks. Learning at this level is like building a city of ideas where every street leads to another, and every intersection reveals something new. The problem is that most people live in small villages, while geniuses build mental metropolises.
Now imagine what would happen if you combined all of this. Spacing that strengthens, creation that deepens, testing that corrects, and thinking that expands. That's the map of genius. But before you assume it's talent, here's the truth. It's conscious practice. And any mind can learn to do this, even yours. From here on, you'll learn how to apply all of this in your daily life and literally train your brain to think like a genius. Imagine you now have all the pieces: review, create, test, and connect. But the real power lies in putting them together into a living system of learning, one that grows with you. When you apply all four principles, spacing, generation, testing, and higher order thinking, something incredible happens. The brain stops being a warehouse and becomes an organizer of ideas. You begin to think like a scientist, curious, questioning, patient, and deeply active in your own process of learning. Look, every time you review an idea, you strengthen the foundation. When you create from it, you build new layers. When you test yourself, you find cracks and fix them. And when you connect one idea to another, you raise mental bridges that make it impossible to get lost. You don't need to be born with talent. You just need to learn how to think actively. A genius mind isn't satisfied with knowing. It wants to understand why and how. It turns every question into fuel. And the most fascinating part is that the more you practice this cycle, the less effort it takes. Learning becomes enjoyable, almost automatic. The brain starts making connections on its own, and suddenly understanding new things feels natural. But there's one last step, the element that turns this whole system into something alive and unforgettable. It's the principle that separates the student from the master, the curious from the wise. And it starts with one simple question. How could I teach what I've learned in a way that even a child would understand? Now imagine this. You've just learned something new. You understood it, took notes, reviewed, tested yourself, but there's still one question that defines whether the learning is truly yours or just borrowed. Could you explain it simply? That's the real test of genius. It's not about sounding smart or using complex words. It's about making the difficult obvious. This is the Feynman method. He believed that if you can't explain a concept simply, you don't understand it well enough. And that changes everything. When you teach, the brain organizes the chaos. It must decide what's essential, what comes first, what connects to what. In that process, you begin to see gaps, inconsistencies, holes you never noticed before. And when you fill those gaps with new insights, knowledge transforms into wisdom. That's why teaching is the highest form of learning. When you try to put your understanding into words, the brain becomes sharper, clearer, more conscious. And memory, once fragile, now anchors itself in meaning. There's no more memorizing. There's living understanding. So if you want to train your mind like a genius, do this. Explain what you've learned, even if it's to no one. Talk out loud, draw it, record yourself, write short explanations.
Because the act of explaining is the act of thinking out loud, and thinking out loud builds the architecture of a brilliant mind. The secret isn't knowing everything. It's learning to think about what you know. Geniuses don't have bigger memories. They have better mental models. They see connections where others see confusion. They see the invisible because they've trained their eyes to notice it. And now you know how to do the same. Learn slowly, create, test, connect, teach. That's the cycle that transforms an ordinary mind into an extraordinary one. Like this video if it helped you see learning in a new way. And tell me in the comments, if you could ask Richard Feynman one question about learning, what would it be? Subscribe to the channel to keep training your mind. One video a week can literally rewire your brain.